Do-hyun stared through the reinforced windows of the Olympus Mons research station. The endless red landscape of Mars stretched out before him. His dark eyes reflected the morning sunlight that filtered through the thin Martian atmosphere. As chief terraforming engineer of the Mars Terraforming Initiative, he had dreamed of this moment for 20 years. "Chief Do-hyun, you need to see this," Jae-yun called from her workstation. Her voice carried a mix of excitement and worry. She was the team's best atmospheric specialist, known for finding patterns that others missed. Do-hyun walked across the main control room, his footsteps echoing in the quiet space. The room was filled with screens showing different parts of their terraforming operation. Machines all across Mars were working to slowly change the planet's atmosphere. "Look at these readings from the northern sensors," Jae-yun said, pointing to a graph on her screen. "The mineral processing units are producing results we didn't expect. The conversion rate is nearly double what our models predicted." Do-hyun leaned closer, adjusting his glasses. The numbers didn't make sense at first, but then he saw it. The Martian minerals they were using to create atmosphere were working better than anyone had thought possible. "Have you double-checked these numbers?" he asked, though he already knew Jae-yun would have. "Triple-checked," she replied. "And I asked the computer to run a full diagnostic. The equipment is working perfectly. This is real, Do-hyun." He straightened up and looked out the window again. Somewhere out there, their machines were turning Mars' own rocks into breathable air, faster than anyone had dreamed possible. "There's more," Jae-yun said, standing up from her chair. "I think we can modify the process to work even faster." She walked to the main display and brought up a new set of calculations. "If we adjust the mineral catalysts to this new formula, we could cut 30 years off our timeline." Do-hyun felt his heart beat faster. The original plan was to make Mars habitable in 100 years. If Jae-yun was right, they could do it in 70. "The board will never approve such a big change," he said, but he was already thinking about ways to convince them. "They'll have to listen when they see these numbers," Jae-yun insisted. She pulled up more data, showing how their discovery could save not just time, but enormous amounts of money and resources. As they discussed the possibilities, warning lights suddenly flashed across the control room. Red warning messages appeared on several screens. "Pressure spike in processing unit 7, called out one of the technicians. Do-hyun rushed to the main control panel. The new mineral reaction was spreading to other units. It wasn't just working faster, it was working too fast. "Shut down units 7 through 10, he ordered. "Jae-yun, help me balance the pressure before we lose the whole system." They worked quickly, their fingers flying over the controls. After 10 tense minutes, the warning lights stopped flashing. The pressure returned to normal. Jae-yun let out a long breath. "That was close," she said. "But did you see how the reaction spread? The minerals aren't just converting faster. They're somehow teaching other minerals to convert faster too. It's like they're learning." Do-hyun nodded slowly. This wasn't just an improvement in their process. This was something entirely new. Something that could change everything they thought they knew about terraforming. "Write up everything we've seen today," he told Jae-yun. "Every detail, every number. We need to understand exactly what's happening here." He paused, looking at the data again. "And Jae-yun, let's keep this between us for now. At least until we know more." She nodded in agreement. As Do-hyun walked back to his office, his mind was racing with possibilities. They had come to Mars to change the planet. Now it seemed Mars had some surprises for them too. The red planet turned slowly outside their windows, unaware that today might be the beginning of its biggest change in billions of years. The pioneers' dream of making Mars habitable wasn't just possible anymore. It might happen sooner than anyone had dared to hope. Project Director Hansol sat at his desk in the Mars Administrative Center, reading the latest message from Earth for the third time. The words hadn't changed. Project timeline too aggressive. Board demands immediate slowdown of operations. He looked through the dome ceiling at the Martian sky. The atmosphere processors had been working for 6 months now, and already the sky showed hints of blue around sunrise and sunset. But Earth's concerns couldn't be ignored. A knock on his office door interrupted his thoughts. Su Bin, their lead geological expert, entered with a tablet in her hands and worry on her face. "Director Hansol, we found something unusual in the Western Mining Zone," she said, placing the tablet on his desk. "The mineral formations there, they're not like anything we've seen before." The screen showed strange, crystalline structures that seemed to spiral in impossible ways. Hansol leaned forward, forgetting about Earth's message for a moment. "Are they dangerous?" he asked. "That's the thing," Su Bin replied, zooming in on one of the images. "They seem to be reacting to our terraforming process. The minerals are changing faster than they should, and they're spreading." Hansol remembered Do Hyun's report from last week about unexpected reaction rates in the atmospheric processors. He had assumed it was just a technical success. Now he wondered if there was more to it. "Have you told anyone else about this?" he asked. "Only my immediate team," Su Bin said. "We wanted your input before proceeding. These formations could either help our project enormously, or," she paused, "or they could force us to shut everything down." Hansol stood up and walked to the window. The massive terraforming machines were visible in the distance, their lights blinking steadily as they worked to transform the planet. "Show me," he said. 20 minutes later, they were in an electric rover, driving across the Martian surface. Su Bin pointed out formations as they passed them, normal ones first, then gradually stranger ones as they approached the western zone. "There," she said, pointing to a cliff face ahead of them. "That's where we first noticed it." Hansol's eyes widened. The cliff was covered in spiraling crystal patterns that seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. As they watched, small pieces broke off and reformed, creating new patterns. "The minerals are actually moving," Su Bin explained. "They're responding to the atmospheric changes we're creating. It's like the planet itself is helping us terraform it." Hansol thought about Earth's message again. How could he explain this to the board? They wanted him to slow down the project, but Mars itself seemed to be speeding things up. "Take samples," he decided. "But be careful. We need to understand this before we proceed." Su Bin nodded and called her team. As they worked, Hansol composed a message in his head. He would tell Earth about the mineral formations, but not everything. Not yet. They needed time to understand what was happening. Back at the administrative center that evening, Hansol met with Do Hyun and Jae Yun. When he showed them Su Bin's findings, their faces lit up with recognition. "It's connected to what we saw in the processors," Jae Yun said. "The minerals aren't just changing, they're evolving." "Can we control it?" Hansol asked. Do Hyun shook his head. "Not yet, but we're learning. The question is, do we continue at this pace, or do we slow down as Earth wants?" Hansol looked at the three eager faces before him, then at the strange crystal sample on his desk. Earth wanted caution. Mars offered opportunity. It was time to make a choice. "We continue," he said firmly. "But we tell Earth we're slowing down. We'll need time to understand what's really happening here. And when we do understand it, we could terraform Mars in half the time we thought." Jae Yun finished. As night fell over the red planet, they made their plans. Something unprecedented was happening on Mars, and they were the only ones who knew. The real question was, were they discovering something wonderful, or were they about to make a terrible mistake? Research scientist Min-ji bent over her microscope in the biology lab, adjusting the focus carefully. She had been examining soil samples from near the strange crystal formations for 3 days now. Something about them bothered her, but she couldn't explain what. Then she saw it. "This can't be right," she whispered to herself. She adjusted the microscope again, but the image remained the same. In the soil sample, she could see tiny structures that looked like fossilized cells. The door to the lab opened, and senior engineer Ta-won walked in, carrying his tablet. "Min-ji, We need to talk about the equipment malfunctions. They're getting worse. Ta-1, come here. You need to see this first, Minji said, not looking up from her microscope. Tai-1 walked over, his boots making soft sounds on the laboratory floor. Minji moved aside to let him look through the microscope. What am I looking at? He asked after a moment. What does it look like to you? Minji watched his face carefully. Tai-1 was quiet for a long moment. It looks like, but that's impossible. These look like bacterial fossils. Exactly, Minji said. She brought up more images on her computer screen. I found these structures in every soil sample from near the crystal formations. And Tai-1, they're not all fossilized. Some of them look recent. Tai-1 straightened up quickly. Recent? Are you saying? I'm saying there might still be life on Mars. Very simple life, but life nonetheless, and I think it's responding to our terraforming efforts. Just then, the lights in the lab flickered. Tai-1 looked up at them with concern. That's what I came to tell you, he said. All our equipment near the crystal zones keeps malfunctioning. Power fluctuations, strange readings, communication problems. At first we thought it was just technical issues, but what if it's not? Minji finished his thought. She turned back to her computer and pulled up a new set of data. Look at these readings. The energy patterns from the crystal formations match the power fluctuations in our equipment. They're connected somehow. Tai-1 sat down heavily in a nearby chair. If you're right about the life forms, and they're connected to the crystal formations, and the formations are affecting our equipment, then everything is connected, Minji said. The strange mineral reactions Du Hyun and Jai-Yun found, the spreading crystal formations Subin discovered, my microbial findings, your equipment malfunctions, it's all part of the same thing. The lights flickered again, longer this time. Minji quickly saved her data and backed it up. We have to tell Director Hansol, Tai-1 said. Minji nodded slowly. But if we do, Earth will find out. They'll shut down the project immediately. No one will risk terraforming a planet that might have living organisms. If we don't tell anyone, we're making that decision for everyone, Tai-1 pointed out. Is that right? Minji looked through the microscope one more time. The tiny structures seemed to mock her with their implications. She had come to Mars to help make it livable for humans. Instead, she might have just discovered that it was already home to something else. We tell Hansol, she decided. But first, we gather more evidence. We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Tai-1 agreed. As they worked late into the night, the lights continued to flicker, and the crystals in the soil samples seemed to glow faintly under the microscope. Somewhere in the Martian soil, ancient life was awakening, and no one could predict what that might mean for the future of two worlds. The first warning came from the weather monitoring station. A massive dust storm was forming in the southern hemisphere, larger than any they had seen before. Station Security Chief Sangmai watched the red cloud grow on the main screen, her face tight with concern. How long until it reaches the main facility? She asked. 3 hours, replied engineering lead Hyunwoo, checking his calculations again. Maybe less. This storm is moving faster than normal. The main atmospheric processing facility sat exposed on the Martian plain, its towering structures vulnerable to the coming storm. Inside the control center, screens showed the facility's current status. All systems were working at full capacity, processing Martian minerals into breathable air. We should shut it down now, Hyunwoo said, looking at the approaching storm. The equipment wasn't designed for storms this big. Sangmei shook her head. If we shut down now, we lose 3 months of progress. Director Hansol was clear. We need to keep the processors running as long as possible. The storm grew closer. They could see it now through the control center's windows, a wall of red dust climbing into the sky. The first winds hit the outer buildings, making them creak. Status report, Sangmei called out to her team. Outer shields holding at 80%, came one response. Power systems stable, said another. Crystal formation activity increasing, a third voice added, with a note of worry. Sang Mei and Hyunwoo shared a look. The strange crystals they had found were growing faster as the storm approached. No one understood why. Suddenly, alarms began to sound throughout the facility. Red warning lights flashed on multiple screens. Pressure spike in the main processor. Hyunwoo shouted, running to his control station. The storm is affecting the mineral conversion rate. Everyone to emergency stations, Sang Mai ordered through the facility's communication system. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. The storm hit with full force. The whole building shook. Outside, they could see pieces of equipment being torn away by the wind. We need to shut down now, Hanwoo insisted. The processors are going to overload. But before Sang Mei could respond, something strange happened. The crystal formations near the facility began to glow with a bright blue light. The light spread, forming a kind of shield above the facility. Look at these readings, Hyunwoo said in amazement. The crystals, they're somehow stabilizing the atmospheric processors. They're protecting them from the storm. Sang Mai watched as the facility's warning lights began to turn green again. The processors weren't just surviving. They were working better than before. Get Min Ji and Taiwan up here, she ordered. They need to see this. For the next 2 hours, they watched as the crystal formations held back the worst of the storm. The atmospheric processors continued their work, protected by the strange blue shield. When the storm finally passed, they found that none of their crucial equipment had been damaged. But the crystal formations had grown significantly, covering more of the surrounding area. The storm should have destroyed us, Hyunwoo said quietly. Instead, we learned something new, Sang Mei finished. These crystals, whatever they are, they're not just changing because of our terraforming. They're helping us do it. As the dust settled on the Martian surface, the team began to realize that they weren't just changing Mars anymore. Mars was working with them in ways they never could have imagined. The question was, what would Earth say when they found out? Jin Ho sat in the research lab late at night, studying data from the recent dust storm. As the youngest researcher on the Mars project, he often worked unusual hours when the lab was quiet. The screens around him showed different views of the crystal formations and their energy patterns during the storm. Something about the patterns kept bothering him. He had seen them somewhere before, but he couldn't remember where. The lab door opened, and Yi Jin walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. She was the atmospheric specialist who had taken over from Jai-yun on the night shift. "You're still here?" she asked, placing 1 cup next to Jin Ho. "It's past midnight." "Look at this," Jin Ho said, pointing to one of his screens. "The energy pattern from the crystals during the storm. Does it remind you of anything?" Yi Jin leaned closer, sipping her coffee. Her eyes widened suddenly. "The atmospheric processors," she said. "It's the same pattern our machines use to convert minerals into air." Jin Ho nodded excitedly. "Exactly. But the crystals are doing it naturally, and much more efficiently than our machines." He brought up another screen showing the original designs for the atmospheric processors. "We've been trying to force the process," he explained. "But these crystals, they work with Mars's natural systems." Yi Jin sat down next to him, fully alert now. "If we could understand how they do it, we could redesign our whole approach," Jin Ho finished. "Instead of fighting against Mars's environment, we could work with it." They spent the next few hours analyzing the data. The more they looked, the clearer it became. The strange crystals weren't just helping their terraforming efforts. They were showing them a better way to do it. "We need to test this," Yi Jin said, standing up. "We can use the backup processor in Lab 3. It's small enough for an experiment, but big enough to prove the concept." Jin Ho hesitated. "We should probably wait for approval. From Earth, they'll take weeks to decide. By then, we might lose this opportunity." She was right. After the dust storm, The crystal formations were more active than ever. It was the perfect time to test their theory. They went to Lab 3 and began modifying the small atmospheric processor. Jin-Ho adjusted its settings to match the crystal's natural patterns, while Yi-Jin prepared a sample of Martian soil containing the active crystals. "Ready?" Jin-Ho asked, his hand on the activation switch. Yi-Jin nodded, watching the monitoring equipment carefully. The processor hummed to life. For a moment, nothing seemed different. Then the crystals in the soil sample began to glow with their now familiar blue light. The processor's efficiency readings started to climb. "It's working," Yi-Jin whispered. "The processor is working with the crystals instead of against them." The readings kept climbing. The small processor was now converting minerals into breathable air 5 times faster than normal, using only half the power. "We need to tell Director Hansol," Jin-Ho said, already saving the test data. "This changes everything." "Wait," Yi-Jin said, pointing to the soil sample. The crystals weren't just glowing now. They were growing, spreading across the testing chamber. And in their blue light, both scientists could see tiny movements, like microscopic dancers celebrating their success. They had found a way to make terraforming work better than anyone had dreamed possible. But they had also confirmed what Minji and Taiwan suspected. They weren't just working with minerals anymore. They were working with something alive. Station Administrator Kyung-ho read the message from Earth for the 5th time. The words on his screen were clear. "All terraforming operations must cease immediately. UN Security Council demands full investigation of biological contamination risks." He looked out his office window at the Martian landscape. The sky had more blue in it now than when they first arrived. The crystal formations glowed softly in the distance. All their hard work was starting to show results, and now Earth wanted them to stop. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Communications Director Hae Newell entered, looking worried. "Sir, we have a problem," she said, placing a tablet on his desk. "I've detected unauthorized transmissions leaving the base. Someone has been sending detailed reports about the crystals and the living organisms to a private company on Earth." Kyung-ho felt his stomach tighten. "Corporate espionage?" "Yes," Hae Newell replied. "Based on the transmission patterns, it's been happening for weeks. They know everything about our discoveries." Before Kyung-ho could respond, his computer chimed with another message from Earth. This one was marked urgent. "Executive action required." "They're sending an investigation team," he said, reading the message. "They'll be here in 3 weeks." "That's not all," Hae Newell said, checking her tablet again. "The company receiving the unauthorized transmissions, Novaterra Industries, just announced they're developing their own terraforming technology. They're using our discoveries without permission." Kyung-ho stood up and walked to the window. The crystal formations seemed to pulse with a steady blue light, as if they understood the danger they were in. "Get the senior staff together," he ordered. "We need to make some decisions quickly." An hour later, the conference room was full. Do-hyun, Jae-yun, Han-sol, Soo-bin, Minji, Ta-won, Jin-Ho, and Yi-Jin sat around the table, their faces showing various degrees of concern. "Earth has ordered us to stop all operations," Kyung-ho announced. "They're worried about the biological implications of our discoveries. But that's not our only problem." Hae Newell explained about the unauthorized transmissions and Novaterra's announcement. The room erupted in angry discussions. "If we stop now, they'll take over our work," Jae-yun said. "They'll do it wrong. They don't understand how delicate the balance is." "But if we don't stop, we'll be disobeying direct orders from Earth," Ta-won pointed out. Minji spoke up next. "The organisms we've discovered, they're not just surviving anymore. They're thriving because of our work. If we stop now, we might lose them forever." Kyung-ho raised his hand for silence. "We have 3 weeks before the investigation team arrives. That gives us time to either shut everything down properly or prove that we're right." Jin-Ho finished. "Show them that what's happening here is too important to stop." Newell checked her tablet again. Sir, I'm detecting more unauthorized transmissions. Whoever is leaking our data is in this base right now. The room fell silent. Everyone looked at each other, wondering who could be the spy. Find them, Kyung-ho ordered. But more importantly, we need to decide what to do about our project. Earth wants us to stop. A corporation wants to steal our work. And somewhere out there, ancient Martian life is waking up, trying to help us make this planet livable again. The decision they made in the next few minutes would affect not just their project, but the future of two worlds. Lead scientists Sung Min and Dae Young worked through their third straight night in the main control room. With only 2 days left before the investigation team arrived from Earth, they had to make their final attempt work. Power levels are holding steady, Dae Young said, checking the readings on her screen. The atmospheric processors hummed around them, working at maximum capacity. Sung Min nodded, his tired eyes fixed on the crystal formation data. The organisms are responding exactly as we hoped. They're multiplying faster than ever. Their plan was dangerous but simple. They would use all their remaining power to create a chain reaction in Mars' atmosphere. If it worked, the changes would be too significant for Earth to stop. If it failed, they would lose everything. Director Hansol entered the control room, followed by Do-hyun and Jae-yun. Status report, he demanded. We're ready to begin the final sequence, Sung Min replied. The crystal formations have spread to all our target zones. Once we start, we won't be able to stop the reaction. What about the spy? Jae-yun asked. If they warn Earth or Novaterra. Newell traced the transmissions, Hansol said. Security is handling it now. We focus on our work. Outside, the Martian sunset painted the sky in shades of blue and red. The crystal formations covered much of the visible landscape now, their blue glow getting stronger as darkness fell. All teams report ready, Dae-young announced, checking the final communications from their other facilities around Mars. Hansol looked at each person in the room. What we're about to do will change Mars forever. Are we sure about this? The organisms are part of Mars, Sung Min said firmly. They've been waiting millions of years for a chance to make their planet livable again. We're not changing Mars. We're helping it change itself. Hansol took a deep breath and nodded. Begin the sequence. Dae-young's fingers flew over her control panel, initiating the carefully planned steps. The atmospheric processors increased their power output to maximum levels. The crystal formations began to pulse with bright blue light. First stage complete, she reported. Crystal response is strong and stable. Sung Min watched his readings carefully. Atmospheric conversion rate is increasing. The organisms are multiplying exponentially now. The room fell silent as they watched their instruments. Everything they had learned about the crystal organisms, every calculation they had made, every risk they had taken, it all came down to this moment. Suddenly, warning lights flashed across all their screens. Power fluctuation in Sector 7. Dae-young called out. The reaction is spreading faster than we predicted, Sung Min added, his voice tense. Should we abort? Jae-yun asked. We can't, Do-hyun replied. The reaction is self-sustaining now. This is what we wanted. We just didn't expect it so quickly. Through the control room windows, they could see the crystal formation spreading across the Martian surface like a living wave of blue light. The organisms were doing what they had evolved to do millions of years ago, changing their planet's atmosphere to make it livable again. As the sun rose on what might be their last day of freedom before Earth's investigation team arrived, they watched their instruments record the biggest atmospheric change Mars had seen in millions of years. They had given Mars's ancient life forms the chance they needed. Now they could only hope they had made the right choice. Dr. Jae-won stepped carefully out of the Earth transport vessel, his aged legs adjusting to Mars gravity. At 73, he had waited decades to see this moment. As the project's founder and original visionary, they had invited him to witness the results of their work firsthand. Director Hansol stood waiting at the airlock. "Welcome to Mars, Dr. Jai-1. Though I should say, it's not quite the same Mars you helped us plan for." Jai-1 looked through the base's large windows. The sky above them was a pale blue, streaked with white clouds. In the distance, crystal formations glowed with their signature blue light, pulsing gently like a planet's heartbeat. "How long until the investigation team arrives?" Jai-1 asked as they walked through the station. 6 hours, Hansol replied. "But I don't think they'll be stopping anything now. The changes are too significant." They entered the main control room, where the entire team had gathered. Do-hyun, Jae-yun, Soo-bin, Min-ji, Ta-won, Jin-ho, Yi-jin, Sung-min, and Dae-young all stood respectfully as Jae-1 entered. Even Kyung-ho and Hae-nul had joined them for this moment. "The latest atmospheric readings, Dr. Jae-1," Dae-young said, displaying the data on the main screen. "Oxygen levels have increased 400% in the past week. The crystal organisms are reproducing faster than we ever expected." "And the spy?" Jae-1 asked, looking at Hae-nul. "Caught and confined," she replied. "Novaterra won't be getting any more of our data." Jae-1 walked to the window, watching the Martian sunrise. The crystal formations seemed to shine brighter as the sunlight touched them, their blue glow mixing with the orange and pink of dawn. "When I first proposed terraforming Mars," he said slowly, "everyone said it would take centuries. They said we were trying to do the impossible." He turned to face the team. "But we weren't doing it alone, were we? Mars was waiting for us, waiting for someone to wake up its ancient life and give it a chance to breathe again." Suddenly, Min-ji called out from her station. "Everyone, look at this. The atmospheric sensors are picking up something new." They all rushed to their screens. Above the crystal fields, clouds were forming. Real water vapor clouds, just like on Earth. As they watched, a light rain began to fall, the first natural rainfall Mars had seen in millions of years. "It's not just the atmosphere," Soo-bin added excitedly. "The soil readings near the crystal formations, they're showing signs of primitive plant life. The organisms aren't just changing the air, they're preparing the ground for new life." Through the windows, they could see the rain falling on the Martian surface. Where it touched the crystal formations, small green spots appeared. The first plants Mars had seen since its ancient oceans dried up. "The investigation team won't be stopping anything," Hansol said firmly. "They'll be witnessing the rebirth of a planet." As the team watched the rainfall together, Dr. Jae-1 smiled. They had come to Mars to make it like Earth, but Mars had shown them a different way. They hadn't just made Mars habitable, they had helped it remember how to live again. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and Mars took its first steps toward a new future, guided by its past and helped by the creatures who had come so far to wake it up.